Welcome back with Gavin Peacock, the former top football star. His book, A Greater Glory, From Pitch to Pulpit, is just coming out. It's a fascinating read and a great tale as well. He's with us from Calgary in Canada. I once went there on holiday and went on the Rocky Mountaineer from there, Gavin, a wonderful country. And of course, you work within the church now. We've been talking about that. Baz Gascoyne, chaplain to, among others, Sheffield Wednesday, Rotherham United and Sheffield Eagles. And James Gregg joins us as well with a bit of action going on. And I know you've also been, come on, admit it, you've been in a pub beer garden already this week, besides a golf course.
Absolutely. Yeah, the two go hand in hand, Alan. You know me.
Absolutely. All right. Do you know, I don't want to be flippant about this, Gavin. I mean, you've been a Christian for, well, most of your life. It perhaps wasn't well known outside of football circles while you were playing. Have you ever prayed for a goal or prayed for a win? Or am I being rather too simplistic there? And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but people do. I mean, I pray for things. You know, I'm not a regular churchgoer, but I'm an occasional attender. And at difficult times of your life, or when you really want something to happen, I'll hand on heart say, yeah, I've uttered a prayer for them. Have you done that?
I've never prayed for a win, no. What I would pray for is that, you know, I would honour God, win, lose or draw, by the way that I played the game. Because God is the God of all of life and he gives us talents and skills. He made me his, but he also made me a footballer for a period of time. And as a Christian footballer, my job was to use the skills he'd given me to the best of my ability. So it was to honour him in my behaviour and in the way that I played the game. One of my heroes of the Christian faith is the great Eric Liddell, who was made famous again by that wonderful film Chariots of Fire in the 1980s. And Liddell was a Christian. He was a Scottish international rugby player, but he was also an Olympic athlete. And in France, in the 1930s, he won the gold medal at the 400 meters. He had to compete in the 400 meters because he wouldn't do the heats in the 100 meters because they were on a Sunday, and he reserved Sunday for God. So he was a man of great Christian conviction, but he died in a prisoner of war camp as a missionary in China a few years after the great victory in the Olympics. And I think in the movie, words attributed to Eric Liddell when he's speaking to his sister, I think sums up the relationship between sport and Christianity. He says to his sister, God made me for a purpose, for China, because he was going to be a missionary in China, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. To not to run would be to dishonor him. To run well is to honor him. So I think that's the kind of ethos I had. And so when I would pray, and you know, I had a club chaplain at QPR, Dave Langdon, who would always have a word of prayer with me in the tunnel or wherever we could get a moment before a game. It would just be to honor God in the way that I played the game and to play the best of my ability. And if that meant beating Manchester United with a couple of winners, then that's fine with me.
Right, indeed. It's not a story without parallel, because I'm old enough to remember in the late 1960s, when I was a young football fan, a player called Peter Knowles, who was a terrific player, played for Wolverhampton Wanderers, and he stunned the football world by, it didn't do, I mean, you continued your career, but he, at the most blossoming time of his career, quit football, and he was Jehovah's Witness, and he just left the game. So there have been parallels to this. I don't know if you remember that or have a recall of that or knowledge of that.
I have a vague recollection of that, yes. There's been instances before. I mean, Alan West was a footballer for Luton Town, and he became a Christian minister. Alan Comfort, who played began his football career with me at QPR, ended up playing for Orient and Middlesbrough. He got a career-ending injury when I was actually playing for Newcastle and he was at Middlesbrough. And he's still a Christian minister today. He and I wrote a book together in the 1990s, the first book I wrote, and it was called Never Walk Alone, paralleling our start together as youngsters, becoming Christians, then together in the Northeast, and him going into ministry and my career going up. So yeah, it's a rare path, but it's one that, you know, one or two before have taken.
But it seems such an irreverent arena, doesn't it? Sport, particularly football. Let's face it, players are swearing all the time on the field. Industrial language is the language of the game. It's dog eat dog. It's ruthless. It has to be. And there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of Christian charity around. So how did you square that off in your life as a player?
I speak about it in this book, In a Greater Glory, that now and again, you know, you'd hear of managers, they heard they got a Christian player in the ranks, or, you know, a guy becomes a Christian, they think, oh no, you know, because how's he going to have the aggression and the drive and that ruthless streak to win that football demands? And I sort of touched on it before, though, is as a Christian in any walk of life, we're called to work. Work is a good thing created by God for us to do. We're called to be the best kind of employees or employers that we can be. That means to work with integrity, to the best of our ability, with what the job demands, as long as it's, you know, ethical, and with an eye not just for our own performance, but for the good of others. And so actually a Christian footballer should be that best kind of footballer he could be. Certainly I was the best kind of footballer I could have been with the talent that I had. And the game demanded aggression. And within the rules of the game, you know, again, you know, speaking in the book about different kinds of aggression. It's not just about going in and smashing someone in a tackle. Aggression begins in the mind, that competitive edge, where you're going to, you know, if you're going to beat me, you're going to have to really lay everything on the line to do it. I will do all that I can within the rules of the game to beat you. So I think that with regards to the aggression and ruthlessness and wanting to win that the game demands, and yet for me, it wasn't the be all and end all. So I wanted it really badly. I felt it really hard, as much as the next man when I lost. But because my identity wasn't ultimately tied up in that, I could ride the lows, I think, in a better way. And then with regards to the lads in the dressing room, you know, you're part of the team. You want to be one of the lads. At the same time, you know, you're walking a line that should be fitting with the Christian faith, and they'll see that. You know, the Christian faith isn't just about a behavioural modification. It's an inside-out change. It's a heart change. It's a motivation change. And I think the guys, you know, began to see that with me as I grew as a Christian, from 18-year-old when I became a Christian at QPR in the early days, through to a 35-year-old when I finished.
Well, one thing you didn't have to cope with in your career was social media. I know you do it now. You're on Twitter. James, you and I work in the media and we see it all the time, don't we? Increasing numbers of players are now, quite rightly, in my view, saying, no, I'm drawing a line here. That is not acceptable. I'm not prepared to put up with that. And football clubs as well are boycotting social media for a period of time, aren't they? It's quite a worry as to where this is going to lead. What do you think will happen? And do you think the protests will cause a change in the way that people behave on platforms?
Look, I'm glad that the clubs are taking a stand, Alan, because I think enough is enough. I think things need to be done in terms of verifying, because if you know, like yourself, I mean, I'm not, but it's quite obvious that it is me on Twitter with the blue ticks and that kind of thing. I actually think that everybody should have to go through a verification process, because quite often you've got a badge, club football badge, you've got a photograph of something that isn't, you've got the little egg, and it's so easy, isn't it, to get away with it. And I think also the temptation is there for people who are frustrated by things to do it. And I just think it's there's no accountability there whatsoever. You've got 12 followers, you've got a pseudonym and a picture that isn't you, and you can basically say what you want to whoever you want. And it's so not befitting of actually, you and I, Alan, have had this thing where people have given us a little bit on certain topics on Twitter and whatever. And it feels like the whole of Sheffield or the whole of the footballing community or the whole of whatever it is, whoever you've angered is on at you. And actually, and you're sitting and you're looking at it and it can bother you. It can really get to you. However, you go to fill your car up with petrol, you go to a restaurant, you go in a pub, you walk down the street, you go to Tesco, wherever it is, right? And nobody says a word to you. And there's people who look at you and they kind of know you and they probably know what's happening, but nobody says anything. And I just think that it's a completely different sphere. It's a completely different place. And people are incredibly vocal and there's no accountability. So I don't know. I think generally people are self-policing a little bit more. You see the odd muppet on Twitter. And I think actually more people are now actually saying, come on. Whereas I think before they wouldn't have actually bothered. So I think it'll be a slow, long process, but what else can realistically these players and clubs do? They can't do a lot more.
What's your take on it, Gavin? Are you glad that social media wasn't around during your playing career, and would you have been able to cope with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it has its benefits. And of course, when Twitter first came out, it was a good place for sharing ideas and creativity, et cetera, et cetera. But I think I have to say that from what I see on Twitter, it's a couple of things really. It's quite addictive for people. They get on there and it creates a pseudo reality. Your Twitter friends, people are living off on a Twitter lifestyle, which isn't real. It's as you James already said, it's kind of unpoliced to a certain degree. People are putting out opinion without really any expertise and with great sense of entitlement, obviously, as well. And I think it's very angry. It's a very angry place now, Twitter. It's a place where people are putting instant reaction, hot-headed reaction, hot takes on everything, in so many characters, rather than considered opinion, which obviously takes a little bit more time and reflection and a little bit more words and, creativity. So that for the good that it was maybe early on, it may be outweighed with the bad now. I mean, I'm on it. I use it for a certain purpose. I think if you do have it, you have to be disciplined with your use of it, and expect that you might get some undeserved criticism, which as a footballer you're used to throughout your career. Public men get public criticism to a certain degree. If you don't want public criticism, don't be a public man or woman. But then you've got the choice of being on social media or not. So I respect the decisions of those players or clubs that are withdrawing or taking a hiatus from it.
It is good for promoting books, though. That's one definite. Definitely,
there's some good
that can be said for it. Baz, I mean, you use Twitter, and I'm sure you surprised some of your friends even with the frankness of a recent tweet. It was following one of the latest stories about the historic abuse of young footballers, which has been a really deep and troubling subject within football, but within life now for a period of months with court cases, etc. And it's something that you very sadly had personal experience of. And I checked this before the show as to whether you would be prepared to sort of address that here.
Yeah. I all my life, as a young kid, all I wanted to do was be a footballer. So in the back alleys up in the northeast and in the fields with my friends. And at the age of 15, I had the privilege of having a 2-week trial with a professional football club. And sadly, on the third day, I was sexually interfered with by the player coach. As a 15-year-old boy, all I knew, because of my environment back home, I just told the coach where to go. I swore, and went back into the change rooms, got changed very quickly, and the rest of the trial I didn't bother going. To be honest, I was scared, but at least I actually made the choice just to say what I thought, and I left. But then I had to deal with all the thoughts afterwards. Did I do something to deserve that? Why did it happen to me? I had to deal with my friends when they found out that I didn't carry on the trial and that I didn't become a professional footballer. And for 11 years, that just festered away inside of me. And a combination of that and a couple of other things. At the age of 17, I tried to take my life. Fortunately, I failed. And then it was 6 months later, someone told me about Jesus and that Jesus, could change my life. But after becoming a follower of Jesus, it was 11 years, because I never heard anyone talk, even in the church, about things like this. I never heard a sermon. My youth club that I was part of, no one ever talked about. They might have, but I never heard anyone talk about real things. So this was always festering away. And when I came to Sheffield to work as a youth worker at the YMCA, my boss, Keith Wells, he said, "Oh, I've booked you into a conference next week." I went, "All right, okay." So I went to this conference at the City Hall. There was over 2,000 people there, Christians from all over South Yorkshire and England. And I'm there, and the first time I've ever been in a meeting that big, a Christian meeting. And during one of the worship sessions, one of the team, the Americans that were over, just walked up to me and says, "Oh," and we all had name tags on. And he just said, "Oh, I'm ever so sorry to bother you, Baz, but I just have a sense that when you were 15, you were sexually interfered with. And I believe God wants to heal you of the hurts and the pain." Well, I didn't even know God could do things like this. So I just said, "No, I'm sorry, mate, you're wrong." And I lied to him. And I went home that night, just totally confused. Anyway, the next day, bless him, he had the courage to come up to me and say, "Listen, Baz, I'm not asking you to talk to me about what happened, but if I would encourage you to talk to someone, someone that you can trust." And that evening, I spent an hour and a half plucking up the courage to talk to my best friend. And I told him and his wife. And he's from up in the northeast, so I was expecting a lot of Geordie, I'm not talking to you about things like that, And literally, he just came over to the other side of the room in his house, knelt down and hugged me. And for the first time in 11 years, I just cried. I cried my eyes out. The anger, the hatred, the feeling of dirt that I felt just started to come out. So now, I say, and I genuinely mean it, if I was to see that person who did what he did to me, which wasn't anything like what the documentary portrayed, I know I would be able to look him in the eye and say, "I forgive you." Even though at the time, as a 15-year-old lad, I was fuming. But, again, I shared this story at a men's conference in Belfast a few years ago, 3,000 men, and a man of 76 came up to me. And he said, "When I was 4, I was sexually abused for a period of years. I've never talked to anyone." And he just stood in front of me. And I did exactly what my friend Steve did. I just hugged him, and he cried and he cried and he cried. And I think, so I feel I have this saying, the memories are still there, but no longer the emotional ties. So I could take you to the place where it happened, but it doesn't affect me emotionally anymore. Because I feel that God's healed me of that. But it was at the time, as a 15-year-old lad, it had a major impact on my life. So I could
that is
small way to the program.
Well, that is such a powerful story, and Baz, thank you for sharing it with us. A football dream died as a result of your strength, really. Yeah. When you look back, and very sadly, Gavin, others who were in that situation were intimidated into putting their football dreams first. So it's something that's a very powerful sort of historic thing, and I don't know if you ever came across that. We'll move on, obviously, to other subjects, but I don't know if you were sort of ever in contact with anything of that nature.
No, not personally, but obviously I was aware of the recent documentary that came out. I haven't seen it, but believe Paul Stewart spoke quite frankly on it. I know Stewie, we played against each other. We've actually had a few messages since the program, and he, very brave, and just it was diabolical. It's a betrayal of trust, and on multiple levels the damage it can do. But what an amazing testimony there from Baz of what the Lord can do to heal. So it's something that needs to be addressed within football, to make sure that it doesn't happen. And as I say, a great and hopeful testimony for those who it has happened to actually talk to someone about it, because it's like even with depression and mental health stuff, there's a great stigma attached to it. I mean, even I've done stuff on mental health, and even in my own church, and it's been quite remarkable how many people after we've talked about it have come up to you and said, actually, I've really experienced this and I suffer this and I've been afraid to talk about it. So two different things, but the same thing is it needs to be spoken about, and people can get good help on it.
Definitely.
Okay, Gavin, thanks very much indeed. And to Baz, again, for sharing that. A few minutes left. Things are starting to happen on sports fields all over the place, and we've got things to look forward to. James, all yours.
Yeah, I was just also going to back that up, Alan, and just say, yeah, fantastic. Because I think that, even if it helps one person who's watching this, or someone that you guys have spoken to, that's absolutely incredible. So very powerful to listen to. Yes, things are starting to happen, Alan. Actually, we'll talk about our two league clubs in Sheffield, briefly, not too much, because it's quite bleak times at the moment. For both Sheffield Wednesday. Wednesday have got Bristol at home this weekend. Blades play Wolves away from home. Less said about both sides. I think the better at the moment from my perspective, certainly. The Sheffield Steelers went 4 points clear at the top of the English Ice Hockey League after a topsy-turvy 6-4 win last night over the Coventry Blaze. Double header for them this weekend. And also the Sheffield Eagles going for back-to-back wins this weekend, a trip to the York Knights this weekend in the Championship. Early bird streaming available. Obviously, no fans allowed in just yet. There's an early bird rate on the Sheffield Eagles website, so you can head to their website to live stream that trip, the Eagles against the York Knights this Sunday. Billy Root, you may have seen, scored 100 last week for Glamorgan against Yorkshire at Headingley against brother Joe. It's the first time they played against each other in a first-class match. They played against each other, I think, in a one-day cup game about 2 or 3 years ago, and Joe came out on top in that occasion. He hit his brother for 6 over his head to win the match. But this time it was Billy who came out on top with 100 not out. So fantastic stuff. And Joe actually texted me afterwards saying it was a masterclass. So no higher praise than that from older brother and also England captain as well. Also, just to mark your card as well, the local Cricket League season, the South Yorkshire Premier League. I know, Alan, you're a big fan of heading down to Abbeydale on a nice summer's day. It's not quite a summer's day at the moment, is it? It's a little bit too chilly. But Collegiate, Sheffield United, Hallam, all the big clubs will be back in action in the forthcoming weeks. A special mention to Matt Fitzpatrick as well. Not the week he was hoping for, but still top 35 or so at the Masters last week. Augusta is no mean feat. Bristol Flyers are the opponents tomorrow night for the Sheffield Sharks. You can catch that game on Sky Sports as well. Getting so much coverage are the Sheffield Sharks in the British Basketball League. And also, just a bit of an aside, it's not action as such, but definitely worth mentioning. We are big champions of non-league football here on this programme on Talking Sheffield. I noticed that many non-league grounds are actually opening up their outside bar facilities. I've noticed that Hallam have done it, various others have done it as well, the ones that we talk about on this roundup near enough every week. I implore you to go sit outside. You don't need to book, certainly at Sandygate, and as is the case at many of the places as well, and go and have a drink. Doesn't even have to be a pint. Just nip in, call in on your way home from work, because I think, well, I joke slightly here, but I think a lot of fans will be heading slightly more to non-league football as things open up, particularly in the Sheffield area. Want something to cheer about, don't they? Disgruntled Blades and Owls fans. But I just think it's such a strong sporting heritage, Sheffield, with the non-league scene. Go and support non-league clubs, because if you don't, they won't be there for much longer. They've had such a tough time of it. So, keep your eyes peeled. Go on Twitter, find your local club and pop in for a pint. Why not?
Indeed. Any excuse. James, thanks very much indeed. just a final word to Gavin as we close the show. Good luck with your book, A Greater Glory, From Pitch to Pulpit. I bet you're doing loads and loads of interviews at the moment, and radio interviews, TV interviews, newspaper interviews. Does it ever sort of get a bit samey and, oh, not that blooming question again, or are you enjoying the experience?
I'm enjoying it, Alan. It's nice to chat to old friends as well, and be, you know, I had a good few years there in the media world, and of course I've built a lot of friendships, and I haven't had that for the last sort of 12 years. So I've missed the chat with the different folks. So it's just been nice to reconnect with quite a few people, and hopefully my book, my story will be interesting. I think it will make you laugh, it will make you cry, but it will definitely make you think. So it's been a real pleasure to be on the show with you.
Thank you so much. Good luck with it. Gavin Peacock, again, thank you to Baz Gascoyne and to James Gregg. That's been a really memorable hour, and a very, very different hour, and a very thought-provoking one. So thanks, gents, and thank you to you for watching. Next week, we'll be back with a special show to lift the spirits of Sheffield Wednesday fans. We'll be celebrating the 30th anniversary of Sheffield Wednesday winning the League Cup under Ron Atkinson at Wembley in 1991, courtesy of a colleague, Alex Miller, whose book 1991 is due out very soon. So I'll have a couple of ex-players and Alex himself on the show next week. Look forward to that. Meantime, take care. All the best. See you soon. Bye.